On March 14, 2024, at 02:17 hours local time, a Russian logistics convoy moving through the Sea of Azov was 38 minutes away from disappearing beneath the waves. The shadow fleet operating out of Berdyansk and Mariupol had been moving an estimated 60,000 tons of military cargo every month: ammunition, fuel, armored vehicle parts, and field rations, sustaining Russian ground forces across the entire southern front. Without those supply lines, 3 Russian combined arms armies would begin running dry within weeks. The Russian naval commander overseeing the Azov corridor believed his shallow water domain was untouchable. The sea was too confined, the Ukrainian navy too degraded, and the distances too short for any serious threat to materialize. He had no idea Ukraine had been mapping every vessel, every route, and every patrol schedule for 11 consecutive weeks. In exactly 38 minutes, that confidence would cost him 2 ships and a logistics hub Russia would not replace for months. 6 Magura V5 unmanned surface vehicles launched from a covert staging point near Ochakiv at 01:39 hours local time, cutting northeast through the shallow Azov waters at 35 knots toward the Berdyansk harbor approach, where 3 Russian logistics vessels were preparing to offload their cargo. High above the sea, a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone was already circling at altitude, feeding real-time targeting data back to the operations cell. The Magura V5s ran in 2-element pairs, each pair assigned a separate target corridor, with the 6th vessel designated as a decoy to draw Russian patrol response away from the primary strike axis. What made this operation different from anything Ukraine had attempted before was not just the target. It was the scale of planning behind it, and the fact that Russia never saw it coming. The Sea of Azov had functioned as Russia's private lake since the seizure of Mariupol in May 2022, with Ukrainian naval assets largely confined to the Black Sea approaches and the Kerch Strait under Russian control. Moscow had treated the Azov basin as a secure logistics corridor, shielded by geography, by shallow waters that limited conventional submarine threat, and by a layered coastal defense network that Russia believed made any surface approach suicidal. That belief was not unreasonable. The Azov is barely 14 meters deep at its center. Its coastline is heavily monitored. Russian Raptor patrol boats maintained regular sweeps, and shore-based radar at Berdyansk covered a significant arc of the western approaches. For a conventional warship, this would have been a death run. The Magura V5 is not a conventional warship. Developed by a Ukrainian defense consortium and first confirmed in combat use in late 2023, the Magura V5 is a carbon fiber unmanned surface vehicle measuring roughly 5.5 meters in length and displacing less than 1,000 kilograms fully loaded. It rides low in the water, a radar cross-section closer to a floating log than a naval vessel, and its electric diesel hybrid propulsion system cuts acoustic signature dramatically at low speeds. At full sprint, it reaches 35 to 42 knots. Operational range is 450 kilometers. Payload capacity is 320 kilograms, enough for a shaped charge warhead capable of breaching the hull of any vessel in Russia's Azov logistics fleet. Here's what nobody expected. The operation almost failed before the Magura units even reached the harbor approach. At approximately 01:52 hours, a Russian Raptor patrol boat operating on a modified schedule, not the one Ukrainian intelligence had documented, crossed directly into the path of the lead Magura element. The Ukrainian operators, monitoring the feed from the overhead reconnaissance drone, had less than 90 seconds to make a decision. Standard protocol would have called for aborting the lead pair and attempting to regroup. Instead, the operations cell made a different call. They accelerated the decoy Magura, drawing the Raptor's attention eastward, and pushed the remaining 5 vehicles into a compressed approach corridor that shaved 4 kilometers off the planned route, directly through a radar shadow created by a small island formation near the harbor entrance. What the Russian radar operators saw that night was a ghost contact, there and then not there, consistent with sea clutter in shallow water. The Raptor turned to investigate the decoy signature. The strike elements continued north. I spent considerable time going through the operational reconstruction published by Ukrainian defense analysts after this engagement, and one detail kept standing out. The decision to redirect through that radar shadow was not in the original plan. It was improvised in real time by operators working from a live drone feed in a forward control station. The flexibility that enabled that decision, decentralized command authority pushed down to the cell level, is one of the most significant and underreported shifts in how Ukraine now conducts these operations. The vessels they were hunting were not warships in any traditional sense. Russia's Azov Shadow Fleet consisted primarily of converted civilian cargo barges, modified river vessels, and a handful of purpose-built military logistics craft. All of them pressed into service after Ukraine's 2022 Harpoon and Neptune missile strikes forced Russia to abandon its more capable Black Sea logistics chain for shallow water routes. The three ships targeted on the night of March 14th included one Cerna-class landing craft capable of carrying up to 45 tons of cargo, or 3 armored vehicles, one converted civilian barge designated in Ukrainian intelligence as Target Bravo, and a smaller fuel transfer vessel that had been resupplying Russian motorized units in the Donetsk sector for at least 6 months. These were not glamorous targets. No cruisers, no destroyers. But what this operation actually reveals is something worth sitting with. Destroying the unglamorous machinery of military supply can matter more strategically than sinking a flagship. The Cerna alone had made over 60 documented transits in the 11 weeks Ukraine spent watching it. 60 transits of 45 tons each. That is a number worth sitting with. By 02:09 hours, the 5 remaining Magura units had split into their assigned attack pairs and were closing on the Berdyansk harbor approach at reduced speed to minimize bow wake and acoustic signature. The overhead reconnaissance drone confirmed all 3 target vessels were still at anchor. Deck lights were on. Crew activity was minimal. The unloading operation had been paused. Standard procedure in the pre-dawn hours. The Raptor patrol boat was still 6 kilometers east, chasing the decoy signal. At 02:11 hours, the first Magura pair accelerated to attack speed. What the Russian crew aboard the Cerna-class vessel experienced in the next 4 minutes has been partially reconstructed from debris analysis, survivor accounts obtained by Ukrainian intelligence, and satellite imagery reviewed afterward. The first Magura struck the Cerna on the port quarter at the waterline. The shaped charge detonated at 02:13 hours and 17 seconds. The secondary explosion, almost certainly the vessel's onboard fuel reserve, lit the harbor visible from the Ukrainian-held coastline more than 60 kilometers away. The second pair engaged Target Bravo 11 seconds later. That vessel carried what Russian logistics records later confirmed, through documents captured in a subsequent ground operation, was a partial shipment of artillery propellant charges bound for the Donetsk front. The detonation was significantly larger than analysts anticipated. The fireball rose over 40 meters. The vessel was destroyed completely. The third pair encountered unexpected resistance. Worth saying plainly, the fuel transfer vessel survived the initial engagement not because of Russian competence, but because of a malfunction in the third Magura's guidance system during the final approach. This is documented in the Ukrainian post-operation technical review. One of the strike vehicles lost its video link at 40 meters from the target and executed its onboard terminal guidance, which worked, but not precisely enough. The charge detonated against the vessel's stern rather than amidships. The ship did not sink. It ran aground on the harbor shallows under emergency power and was confirmed destroyed by a follow-on strike 48 hours later. 3 targets engaged, 2 destroyed outright, 1 disabled and finished within the week. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface, and yet it does when you look closely. Russia had shore-based radar. It had patrol craft. It had confirmed intelligence that Ukraine was developing maritime drone capability, and yet the Azov approach remained organized on patrol patterns established in 2022, before the Magura V5 was even in the field. The Russian Naval Command had received the threat assessment. They had updated their doctrine on paper. In practice, the patrol schedule that night still reflected assumptions about Ukrainian capability that were already obsolete. What do you think? Does this represent a systemic failure in Russian military adaptation, or something more fundamental about how large military bureaucracies respond to novel threats? That question matters beyond this operation, and it is worth sitting with. At 02:31 hours, Russian coastal defense forces at Berdyansk went to general quarters. By that point, The Magura units had already reversed course and were running south at full speed. The Raptor, that had been drawn east by the decoy contact, reversed and began pursuit. But the Magura V5's speed advantage in open water made interception effectively impossible. The decoy vehicle, its role complete, was scuttled remotely in deep water to prevent recovery. The strike was over in 18 minutes from first impact. Russian state media acknowledged an incident in the Azov region without specifying the nature or scale. The Ministry of Defense released no statement for 31 hours. Ukrainian military intelligence published satellite imagery within 6 hours. Commercially sourced Maxar frames showing the burned-out hulk of the Cerna resting on the harbor bottom in approximately 4 meters of water, the debris field from Target Bravo scattered across a 200-meter radius, and the fuel transfer vessel beached at an angle against the eastern harbor wall. The strategic impact extended beyond the ships themselves. Berdyansk port ceased logistics operations for 11 days following the strike. Confirmed through commercial shipping traffic analysis and Russian military communications, intercepted and later published by Ukrainian intelligence. The Shadow Fleet's remaining vessels were redistributed to Mariupol, adding transit distance and time to every supply run. Route modifications forced on Russia by this single operation degraded supply throughput to Southern Front units by an estimated 20 to 30% for the better than 2-week period of disruption. 3 armored brigades operating in the Zaporizhzhia sector reported ammunition consumption restrictions in the days following. Whether those restrictions were directly linked to the Berdyansk disruption or to parallel Ukrainian interdiction efforts on the rail network remains contested in open-source analysis, but the timing is not easily dismissed. What Russia did next is instructive. Within 3 weeks of the strike, new sensor arrays were installed on the harbor breakwater at Berdyansk. Patrol schedules were randomized. 2 additional Raptor boats were repositioned to the Azov fleet. Russian electronic warfare assets deployed to the coast began broadcasting GPS spoofing signals across the western Azov approaches, a measure that complicated subsequent Ukrainian drone operations in the theater for several weeks. Russia adapted. But it adapted reactively to a threat that had already executed. The Magura V5 operations that followed, in April, in June, and again in September of 2024, each encountered a modified Russian defensive posture. Each time, Ukrainian operators found new vectors. The sea is large. The radar shadows are many. And according to Ukrainian defense industry sources, Magura production increased by over 200% in the 6 months following the March engagement. The Sea of Azov is no longer a safe harbor for Russia's logistics chain. Every vessel that moves through it now moves, knowing that an adversary with $50,000 drones and 11 weeks of patience can find it, track it, and send it to the bottom in 18 minutes. There is no defensive configuration that makes that threat disappear. Ukraine has not won the Azov, but Russia has lost the certainty that made it valuable. And in modern warfare, that certainty, the freedom to operate without fear, is worth as much as any single ship that burns in the night. Comment yes or no. Will Russia find a sustainable answer to Ukraine's maritime drone campaign before the end of this conflict? The pattern so far suggests the answer is more complicated than either side wants to admit.